What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Pinwheels pregame show. Just a reminder, scan that QR code top of your screen, or that QR code top of your screen, directionally challenged here, the reverse split. Scan that QR code, get yourself a shirt from Homage. They got a ton of cool stuff on there, vintage shirts for almost every team in Chicago, you name it, they got it. They even got racing shirts. They had Indy 500 stuff right up my alley. So scan that QR code. You let them know Pinwheels sent you and get yourself a shirt. We're going to be talking finally. White Sox fans had a legitimate reason to watch a game. Drew Thorpe made his much anticipated MLB debut. For those of you who need a refresher, Drew Thorpe, kind of a new name this year. We got him just before the season started in that Dylan Cease trade with the Padres. He came over here with Jair Iarte, couple other prospects. He got the call up to the major leagues straight from Birmingham. A kid had been tearing it up down there, and he's limited opponents. I believe it was a 170 batting average down in Birmingham. That Barons team has been really fun to watch this entire season, and Thorpe was a big reason why. So they let him bypass AAA completely, get the call straight up to the show. I should mention, too, if you look at his numbers down in AA, he's ranked right now at MLB Pipeline. He's a 54th overall prospect in baseball. Hello, Senor. Thanks for hopping on here. But he was 7-1 down in AA, 135 ERA, limiting it to opponents to a 170 batting average. And his repertoire, kind of interesting, reminds me a little bit Lucas Giolito. So his fastball is not going to overpower anyone. Sits in the low 90s. Last night, he was around 91, 92 miles an hour with that fastball. What sets him apart, though, devastating changeup. This thing's filthy. He disguises it really well, like his fastball, except when he releases that thing, it kind of slams on the brakes, and it has this like late fading movement. And unlike Giolito, I actually think his secondary pitches, from what I have seen, I haven't watched a ton of them down in AA, but his secondary pitches are really good. His curveball, I think, is a little bit further ahead than Giolito's was when he was first starting out with the Sox. He's also got a very good slider or in the low 80s, through the cutter a little bit too. So he's got some good secondary pitches to work with. But the changeup, by far his best pitch. This is exciting for White Sox fans because, like, let's be honest, there isn't a whole lot to reasons to tune in for this team. But it was kind of sad because, quite honestly, this was the biggest debut we have had in a while. I think arguably since Dylan Cease's debut. You know, it's not often you get a top 100 prospect in baseball making their MLB debut for your team. But unlike some of the previous debuts, this one didn't seem like it had as much anticipation and build up or just excitement from the fan base. And I mean, understandably so when you look at it, because like I said, there's not a whole lot of reasons to watch this team. It's a roster that was very poorly constructed. A lot of these guys will not be with the team in September, let alone the start of next season, because they're going to trade half of them or they'll be released. And we've kind of fell into the trap of trusting the prospects during the last rebuild. But it's unfortunate because I remember exactly where I was, like Michael Kopech's debut. Remember exactly what I was doing then. That was my freshman year. We had just started and moved into the dorms. And that night of his debut was in August. We were supposed to have a freshman orientation where all the freshmen were supposed to go down to the gym, and they're going to have some people speak to us. There's a mandatory thing where they check in. I skipped that. I was in my dorm watching Kopech's debut. I had a little scorecard out. I was kind of a loser, keeping score, tracking his debut. That guy cut short by rain, but I remember watching it. And, the fans all standing up every time there was 2 strikes, a lot of energy in the crowd. Dylan Cease's debut, first day of a doubleheader. You go to the bullpen before the game. I was in the stadium that day. They're playing the Tigers, and the bullpen just surrounded with people. Everyone's buzzing, and, he's walking up to the mound. He's getting a standing ovation. There's just a lot of excitement. This one didn't feel like it had the juice, and that sucks that this is what the White Sox organization has done. It's taken a lot of the excitement out of it, because if this was 3 years ago, you imagine how much more this would be talked about and how much more exciting this would have been. Regardless, though, baseball, like that aside, I thought he did a tremendous job last night. He was facing a pretty tough Mariners lineup on the road. He looked composed throughout the entire game. He ended up going 5 innings, only allowed 2 runs. Only one of those runs was earned. He did walk 2. He allowed 3 hits and 4 strikeouts. So overall, pretty impressive performance. But the poise was what impressed me the most, because the defense did not do him any favors. As we mentioned, of those 2 runs, only one of them was earned. Nicky Lopez, usually a pretty good fielder, he makes an uncharacteristic fielding error. That should have been the second out of the inning. Next batter hits into a force out, but because of that error, it would have been the final out. It was only out number 2. And then there's double. That guy comes around to score. Later, as his pitch count's kind of going up, because that made him work a little bit more in that 5th inning there, too. Another error. Lenyn Sosa makes a throwing error, so he has to work around that with an incredible defensive play, which we'll get into a little bit later. But, one of the things that stood out to me was he was able to make adjustments throughout the night. And that's something that Fids is always talking about that great players do is, you'll make adjustments in between games. Well, good players will make adjustments in between games. Great players will make adjustments like in between from at bat to at bat. And that's what I think we saw a lot from Thorpe yesterday is, the command was a little spotty at times. I think in that 4th inning, kind of overthrowing a little bit, but he stuck with it. And he wasn't afraid, despite only being a 23-year-old, to shake off Martin Maldonado, which was something that I also really stood out to me. As Maldonado, as much as we like to shit on him as Sox fans, when they have that joke all-star thing going, he can't hit. The defense is kind of deteriorated. He is a good guy to have as your battery mate from MLB debut. He has seen a lot as a catcher. He knows how to call a game. And Thorpe had the confidence, despite making his debut, hey, I'm willing to shake you off. I know what I'm comfortable throwing here. So that was nice to see. He also worked backwards in counts. He was not afraid to open up with that curveball to start off in at bat and kind of work backwards, which was nice to see. And even when he did get in trouble, he didn't look too flustered on the mound. He was able to work his way out of it. And then he made this great, they talk about his athleticism on his scouting report. If you're reading the MLB pipeline scouting reports about these guys. And one of the things that they said was he's a very athletic dude. And he put that on full display. Defense was letting him down. All right, so be it. He gets Cal Raleigh to chop a soft ground ball near third. He goes off the mound, ranging to his left, picks up the ball off his back foot, fires perfect strike to first base, get out of the inning. Left the game in position for a win. That's really all you can ask for out of that. And I think he could have won 6 innings too if there wasn't for those couple of errors that had that pitch count going a bit higher. So overall, really impressed. He threw 98 pitches. 38 of those were changeups. He relied very heavily on that changeup. But the changeup, he drew 19 swings. Because as we mentioned, he kind of has the same arm location as the fastball, which is what you got to do as a good pitcher. And he got 7 whiffs off of that. Now, a couple things that concern me a little bit with Thorpe, and I haven't gotten the chance to watch him a ton in Double A. I do know he was shoving down there, and like I said, I was impressed with his poise. I think with that fastball, though, obviously you're not going to be blowing anyone away with a low 90s fastball. But I think for him, it's going to be key to stay ahead in counts, as it is with almost every pitcher. It's always important to stay ahead in a count. But unless he can throw, he does a good job locating that fastball. So it's not like you have to be throwing gas to be successful in the MLB. We saw that with Mark Burley. I mean, he threw it in the 80s, his fastball. But if you can locate it, you can make a living in this league as long as you have good off-speed pitches, which Thorpe does, and he can throw those for strikes. But if he's not throwing those for strikes, it's going to be critical for him to get ahead in counts, because I think if you're throwing a fastball in a hitter's count, sitting low 90s, and you have to get it over for a strike, there could be some problems there. But overall, I mean, it's hard to find much to complain about. I'd give him an A- on that debut. Some really positive comments from his teammates too. Paul DeYoung came out and said, hey, I was really impressed with the range he showed just on that defensive play. If you haven't seen it yet, definitely go check that out. Just a really good defensive play. And he's got the Dylan Cease mustache going for him too. So Andy in the chat here. Yeah, he was amazing. He was amazing last night. It was good to see him do it. But of course, in typical White Sox fashion, can't say we're surprised. They blow that game. He does not get credit for the win because the bullpen chokes it away. So, what are you going to do? Other White Sox news from this week. We'll be looking forward to his next start. I'm going to be curious to see how they build off of that. Also, kind of curious if you want just a little bit of a reference, because as we mentioned, I pulled up these numbers because I was like, seems like, and I'm trying to think of another top 100 prospect for the White Sox that made their MLB debut with the White Sox, because Giolito made his when he was still with the Nationals. So did Lopez. So I think Dylan Cease, I might be wrong here, but I think he was the last top 100 prospect to make his MLB debut with the White Sox in the start. Cease's debut back on July 3rd, 2019 versus the Tigers, kind of similar to Drew Thorpe's. He threw 5 innings as well. Unlike Thorpe, he gave up 4 hits. Thorpe only gave up 3. Cease allowed 3 runs. All of them were earned. Thorpe only gave up 1. Cease also walked 4 guys. Thorpe only walked 2. However, Cease struck out 6. Thorpe struck out 4. So what does that mean? Absolutely nothing. You can't really take away too much from a first start. But, I thought that was kind of interesting too, because it kind of reminded me, he's got the Dylan Cease look, but he kind of has the Lucas Giolito repertoire, but that debut was very reminiscent of, to me, of Dylan Cease's first start against the Tigers. So that's exciting. I'm happy. I'm so happy to see him doing well. And there's still a couple other prospects they have in the system getting called up, like that Yararte, the other guy they got in that Dylan Cease trade. He's looking really good down in Double-A as well. Now, sticking with the major league level, as we mentioned earlier, there's going to be a couple trades made at the deadline. One of the names getting floated around, Luis Robert. His name's starting to pick up a little traction. Apparently, the Phillies being very aggressive in pursuing it. I've talked about this in past shows. I think it would be a mistake for the White Sox to trade Luis Robert. He's still under team control till 2027. He got a 5-tool player. He showed what he can be at his peak last year. These type of guys don't come around often. They don't spend money in free agency. And Jerry Reinsdorf said, I want a quick turnaround. What is that signaling to the fan base if you're trading one of your core guys? Hoping to get another player that turns into Luis Robert. So I don't think it makes much sense there. Also, the news that came out was they were looking for a Juan Soto type return, which is ridiculous because he's not Juan Soto. The injury history is very real. As much as I like Luis Robert, I do think he's a generational type talent with all those tools that doesn't come around often. But let's face it, it's only been 1 year that he's realized his full potential. We've seen flashes in other years, like his rookie year. He won the Gold Glove in 2020. When he came off injury 2021, he was looking pretty good too. So there's been flashes here and there, but overall, it's just not the same resume as Juan Soto. So you're not going to get that type of return. Teams, I don't think, are going to be willing to cough up as much as the White Sox are going to be wanting to ask. So that doesn't make a lot of sense. So long story short, I don't buy any of this report. I don't think Luis Robert is going anywhere, and I think it would be dumb for the White Sox to do so. Now, here's why we'd see the White Sox wanting to make that move. Because if you're the White Sox, and this is what's annoying about this team, but I can see why they would want to do it, by trading away top players like Luis Robert, it's extending your clock is the front office. Because when you have a player under team control through 2027 like Luis Robert, you're expected to be able to contend by the end of 2027. If you're trading him, that clock is extended. You're also pushing away the time that you would have to pay him. Because when that clock's up, you either have to make the decision, do we want to re-sign him or not? And then if you do want to re-sign him, he's probably going to demand over $100 million. Sox have not gotten to that mark in their franchise history. One of just two teams not do that. So I could see it would be a very White Sox move to trade him away just to get some more prospects. Could be like, hey, we got prospects. We can extend our window. There's no clock on the prospects, or not nearly as much. You're kind of extending it. So that's where I could see them doing it. Don't think it would make a lot of sense. Don't think it's going to get done just because I think the asking price, even if they do want to trade him, is going to be way too high. We saw how long it took for the Dylan Cease trade. And Chris Getz is more of a stickler. He showed he's kind of a stickler. He was holding out for a big return. He did eventually get it, but I don't know if you're going to be able to do that with Luis Robert anytime for the trade deadline. I also think it doesn't make any sense because you got Crochet, who's looked like a stud that you can build around, and you got Robert, who you've already proven that you can build around. So both those guys getting traded doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Another big interesting thing that kind of came out this week, and I'm almost sick of talking about Pedro at this point, but you have to because there's not a whole lot of storylines surrounding this team, was Bob Nightingale. He had his notebook that he puts out in USA Today every Sunday, and he always has some pretty interesting nuggets in there. And this one stood out to me. He had one talking about Pedro Grifol. And so a week ago, Ken Rosenthal, both of these guys, pretty well-respected baseball insiders, Ken Rosenthal wrote an article in the New York Times basically insinuating that, like, hey, it's not a matter of if Pedro is going to get fired. It's when his days are numbered. This guy's on the hot seat. Like the clock's, speaking of the clock's ticking on Pedro. So that kind of led a lot of fans to believe, oh, maybe they'll fire him mid-season. Look at the record. He currently has the worst winning percentage White Sox franchise history. That should come as no surprise. Now, not all of that is on Pedro because this is a very, as we mentioned, very poorly constructed team. They've had a lot of injuries. So not all of that can be pinned on Pedro. I think a lot of fans just want a pound of flesh because this season's been so frustrating. He's the easiest guy, and he doesn't help matters by making a lot of really bonehead decisions. I thought he mismanaged the bullpen terribly in that one loss against Boston last week. And, he always has those stupid post-game press conferences where he'll have those those quotes where it just make your eyes roll. But Bob comes out, and Bob Nightingale, very well connected to the White Sox. Oftentimes, Jerry's got a good relationship with him, so he'll feed him information. He was the first one on the Tony La Russa news. He comes out and says, yeah, they are not going to, Pedro is not, he's not going to be fired immediately. They're going to wait till the end of the season, and they'll kind of reevaluate it after the season. And the front office does not currently blame Pedro for their bad record. And so that stance kind of makes a little sense. Now, I'm in the position of you got all these prospects coming up. You got to be trying to establish a good winning culture, which Pedro clearly does not know how to do. Ozzie Guillen actually had some interesting comments saying that he thinks Pedro's scared of Martin Maldonado, which is why he keeps playing him every day, which I don't know if that's true. I'm not in the room, but that wouldn't surprise me because you got a catcher, and as bad as Maldonado's been this year, look, he's been in the league a while. He's been on World Series teams. He's played under Hall of Fame managers like Dusty Baker, who do know how to hold players accountable and do know what they're doing in the dugout. So he knows what a good team and a good manager is supposed to look like. And I'm sure he knows that this ain't it. So Ozzie's point was like, hey, I think he's a little afraid of Maldonado, doesn't want to get called out, doesn't know how to handle like a veteran like that has all this experience. So that's why he keeps playing him every day, despite the fact Corey Lee has clearly shown he should be getting more at bats than Maldonado. So there's kind of stuff like that where it's like, this guy should not be at the helm, especially when you have these prospects coming up. I would just cut your losses and fire him. Now, but from the White Sox perspective, they're looking at it like, hey, we don't blame him for this win-loss record. We know it's a bad team. And also, the other thing you have to point out, you know how much they're paying Pedro? He is currently the second highest paid manager in the MLB right now, behind only Craig Counsell. And that blew my mind when I found out, although it was the one who told us that a few weeks ago in our chat, that they're paying him roughly $3 million a year, second highest paid manager in baseball. You know the White Sox and their reputation. They don't like spending money. It's the way it is. They will if they have to, but they're looking at it. Look at this record. Do we think we're going to contend next year? No, we're so far from contention. Why do we want to eat that money? Just let them write it out. So I understand their thought process. Don't agree with it, but thought that was interesting. So those of you wanting Pedro to get fired, probably not going to happen this year. And they said they're going to reevaluate this offseason. So we'll see. I don't know what's going to go into those evaluations. Can't imagine they'll be that much in depth. They didn't even bother interviewing any outside candidates for their general manager position, which pretty important. So none of the White Sox don't think they'll do their due diligence in that decision. I would, if I had to bet, I would think that it's going to come down to the bottom line of the pocketbook rather than developing players and moving forward. Yeah, I mean, at his point, he should be selling snake oil for negotiating that payday. Yeah, it's ridiculous. And they were getting, and look, I'll admit, when they made that hire, I drank the Kool-Aid when they first hired him. I'm like, okay, I kind of see why they got this guy. But looking back at it, man, it's like, oof. Bench coach for the Royals. Not a great deal of success. That World Series team, he was a catching coach. So not necessarily integral part of that. We were sold on the fact that, or I should say, I was sold on the fact that when he got that press conference, he was talking about how much they were going to prepare, and he seemed like a good communicator. A couple press conferences in, that clearly showed was not the case. So, yeah, it's shocking to say the least, but the White Sox, they're all about their bottom line. That also goes into the Athletic had an interesting article that came out this week as well, where they did their player surveys. And they surveyed about 100 players. They asked them 6-7 questions. I believe it was 6 questions, I want to say, that were in there. I asked them a series of questions. All of these answers were anonymous, so they could speak freely about it. One of the questions was, which organizations in the MLB have a bad reputation amongst the players? It's about 79 players responded to that question. Second highest response, the leading candidate was the Oakland A's. They had the most responses, players saying they had a bad reputation. Second, the Chicago White Sox. And there's a lot of similarities to Oakland, as we mentioned. Only 2 teams in the MLB did not spend over $100 million. Another one of the questions in that survey, which I found interesting, was, do you think the Dodgers' big spending spree over the offseason, where they spent over $1 billion, I think it was like $1.2 billion, I think, on players. They spent a lot of money. Do you think that's good for baseball? And 91% said yes. I mean, obviously these players want to get paid. They didn't have an issue. They like when teams spend. White Sox, not known for spending at all. There was one player that said it just looks tough to show up to work every day. It kind of looks like they're just going through the motions. Another player said, I have never heard a good thing about this organization. One did say that, hey, out of all the bad teams, at least this one has the potential to be good, and they should be good, but they operate like a small market team in the city of Chicago, which is frustrating. But I mean, this should come as no surprise. Like, they've earned this reputation throughout the years. And I think it's going to affect, and it's a problem because it's going to affect once they do get into this contention window. supposedly, it's going to affect their ability to get free agents. I think we've already kind of seen that play out. We saw it, I thought, this offseason where Getz did not have much of a budget to work with. But you saw, I mean, they're having problems drawing top tier, any sort of talent. That's why they had to go to get Eric Fetty and take a flyer on him coming out of the KBO. It is because no one wants to come there. And Chris Getz said as much. That's why he wanted to improve the defense so much, is because he's like, we're having problems signing free agent pitchers. I want to improve the perception here. We got to improve the defense and make it more of an attractive place to play. Kevin Pillar said something very similar when he signed. He admitted on the White Sox Talk podcast, Chuck Garfien, before the start of the season, before he got DFA'd and started tearing it up with the Angels. But anyway, before he signed with the right after he signed with the White Sox this offseason, he came up and was like, yeah, I was hesitant to sign with the Sox. I talked to a bunch of former players there, and I hadn't heard very good things. So they're getting this very bad reputation, and it's gonna make it tough. Like, it's gonna get to the point they're gonna have to spend more than they want to on free agents, which they don't like because no one's gonna want to come there. And I think that's also why you see them settling for Andrew Benintendi, who's been their highest paid player in franchise history, because they had to overpay for him. So that was a little disconcerting to hear. Can't say I was surprised they have such a shitty reputation, because that's what happens when you don't spend money on free agents. You take all these shortcuts and you have no accountability in the room. So it's a poorly run organization, and the players starting to know it too. And word's getting around the league. So they've earned that reputation. Southside Deech here in the chat. Trading Crochet and Robert will also give more reasons for players not to want to sign with the Sox. Top of that, what player will even consider an extension with them? Absolutely. That is an excellent point, because when it comes time to pay players, you're just going to trade Crochet and Robert when it comes time for their extension. What type of message is that sending? I mean, that's a very good point. Also, side note, was it just me? Now, I wasn't in the stadium when this happened. So someone, if you're in the chat, you were at this game. But when Lucas Giolito and Liam Hendricks came back for that the reunion with the Boston Red Sox, and they had that tribute video, was it just me? Because the clip I saw, it looked like that tribute video kind of sucked ass. Like, it was a very lame tribute. Like, from what I saw, it was like short. It wasn't very good. I thought they could have done a little bit better, especially for how much. And now Liam was only here for a couple of short seasons, but he was one of the more likable guys on that team. I thought he was very instrumental. And Lucas Giolito, I know he gets a lot of crap, but think about everything he did with the White Sox in his time here. I mean, won 2 playoff games, threw a no-hitter, and that first playoff game against Oakland, that was the only playoff game they won. So I thought he did a lot with that team. Just from the story of being the worst pitcher in baseball to coming back to being an all-star, and then to go and throw a no-hitter, and then to go out in your first playoff start against Oakland, kind of when like things are ramping up 2020, and have a great start. I thought he meant a lot. I mean, obviously it didn't pan out quite like people wanted, but I don't know. I thought the Sox could have done a little bit better job, and their tributes to both of them. But that's neither here nor there. It kind of just goes in to the bad reputation theory, which, what are you gonna do? Moving forward this week, so I'll be interested to see with Thorpe in that wonderful mustache. He's got the look down already. His next start going to be very interesting to see how he adjusts going forward. I'm also curious to see who the White Sox All-Star representative is. I am fully behind the Volt Martin Maldonado to represent this team, because he is the perfect representative for this current iteration of the White Sox with his what is he batting now? Well, he got a couple hits last night, so he might be heating up a little bit, but it's below 100. He's batting well below 100. Defense has been terrible. That's the guy that should be representing the White Sox. So Volt Maldi, if you haven't already, I think that he's gonna be perfect representative for this team. Also, Andrew Vaughn, quietly, another guy that's kind of been a punching bag, but let's give credit to where credit's due. Andrew Vaughn has been heating up. And, everyone was selling their stock on Vaughn. They wanted him sent down. I was saying, sending him down is not going to do anything. You might as well ride out the season with him. Same with Lenyn Sosa, just to see what you got. And Sosa's kind of tearing it up, too. But courtesy of our friend, fellow Sports Mockery employee, Shy Sox fan Mike, since May 1st, Vaughn, 33 hits, 8 doubles, 7 home runs, 17 RBIs, a 481 slugging percentage, and a 785 OPS. So is that all-star level? No, but noticeable improvement from our first baseman, Andrew Vaughn. So that's good to see. Another guy I owe an apology to, Paul DeJong. I was not a big Paul DeJong guy when they signed him. I thought we should have kept Tim Anderson. I was wrong about that. TA still struggling in Miami. So that was a smart decision for the White Sox. Get that $14 million off the payroll. And DeYoung leading the team in homers. Had another home run last night. He's leading. I think he's got 13 on the year. He had an interview with 670 The Score where he came out and said, like, look, hey, I would like to play for a contender. I'm trying to improve my value so the White Sox can get as much back for me if they do decide to trade me. In the meantime, I'm trying to help all the young guys here. And I appreciated the sentiment because, like, you know, he's saying, he's being honest. Like, I don't blame him. I would want to get the hell out of Chicago too, raise that trade value. And he's doing just that. I think a team will trade him. He's having a much better offensive season than he was last year with the Cardinals. And the Cardinals were still able to pawn him off to the Blue Jays. Now, he did get released 13 games in with the Blue Jays because he was terrible last season. But the bat has significantly improved. His hard hit percentage, top half of the MLB, he's hitting, I think, over like 40% of his at-bats. He's making hard contact, or what at least Baseball Savant considers hard contact. But that's good to see. I hope we can get something for him. Tommy Pham going on the IL kind of came at the wrong time because his value was still pretty high. But I think you package DeYoung with another like key piece you're trying to trade. Maybe you include him with the Pham trade. I think you could probably get something. Dan Garcia in the chat here saying it would be stupid to trade Crochet. So far, I'm liking what we have in Thorpe. Also agree. It would be stupid to trade Crochet. You have a guy that's shown he can be a bona fide ace. I think he's only going to get better. A team trading for him. Now, if I'm an opposing team, I'm making my offer to trade for him right now before that value goes up. Because you don't have to pay him for a while. And left-handers like that do not grow on trees. So I think if you're trading for him now, you're buying low because he's only going to get better. And he had an interview after his last start where Crochet was like, hey, yeah, the arm still feels pretty good. It's interesting too, because we were talking to one of Kevin's former players, Kevin Fidd's former player. Tune into Pinwheels and Ivy tonight, 8:00. This is just a pregame show for it. But one of the White Sox also prospect, Tanner McDougal, came on the show a year ago, and he was rehabbing with Crochet, and he was the first one to tell us, like, hey, like, he looks good. The guy's stuff is still filthy. He's throwing harder than ever, and I think we've seen that materialize. He looks really comfortable. But you get a 1-2 punch in that rotation with Thorpe and Crochet, like, all of a sudden you're starting to, you got half the rotation built there. You got the pieces in place, and then you still got Schultz coming up in the minor leagues. Nastrini, we still got to see what he... But you can see where this rotation could kind of come into shape, and just put trading Crochet, that just signals they don't think they can win by 2027. And they want to extend that clock. And quite frankly, I think if you do that, you're going to lose a lot more fans than you already have. More people are showing up to these games than they really should. I mean, the fact that they had 15,000 the other night against Boston, like that game they lost like 14-2, that just shows, like, if you put a good team on the field, fans will show up. You just keep putting all this crap out. And they already don't have a whole lot of reasons to watch. Like, that Thorpe debut should have had so much more excitement than it did, but the fan base just doesn't care anymore. And I don't blame them at this point in the season because there's really no reason to tune in or get excited. But you trade Crochet, and now fans have to deal with that frustration, hear about more prospects coming in. You forget it. Forget it. There are a lot of people going to be jumping ship if Crochet or Robert gets moved. And I also think strategically doesn't make a whole lot of sense for either. Now, Fetty, on the other hand, I like Fetty. But he would be a guy I could see, like, okay, yeah, even though he has a year of control, you're probably not going to contend in that year of control. He's the guy you trade. Crochet, absolutely not. That's all I have for you this week. Thank you so much for hopping on. Just as a reminder, like we mentioned earlier, the regular Pinwheels and Ivy show with our friend Matt Zawoski, Kevin Fiddler, and Aldo Soto coming up tonight, 8:00. Recapping some stuff in Cubs land. I'm sure they will talk about Thorpe's debut a little bit as well. So make sure you're there tonight at 8:00. Thank you so much for joining us. I'll be back next week at noon.